When I hear that ocean sound, I'm gonna rise, I won't stay down. Ain't no tide can pull me under now. Well, I look way down the shoreline. What do you think I see? I see the tide rewinding, showing who I used to be. Ain't no tide can pull me under now. There ain't no tide can pull me under now. Well, look down yonder starlight, shine your glow on land and sea. But don't you guide that current on till you hear from me. Ain't no tide can pull me under now.
Hi everyone, Mookie here. If you understood the various references in our intro, make sure to leave a comment below and I'll let you know if you got it right or not. Also, don't forget to subscribe and whatnot, as it does help small creators like me. Your engagement is what encourages me to continue making content like this. Today, we're taking a look at the gun that won 2 world wars! The M1911A1. In particular, this clone is made by Tisas and imported by SDS. And we will talk about how it compares to the original military model. To do that though, we first need to talk about the history and adoption of the 1911. In the year 1911, after years of rigorous testing, John Browning's .45 caliber pistol was formally adopted by the US Army as the Model 1911, a firearm that would go on to serve every major American conflict since its inception. However, the decision to adopt it was plagued by the age-old debate that seems to have not been settled to this day: stopping power. At the dawn of the 20th century, the US Army found itself bloodied and battered. Not in Europe, but in the jungles of the Philippines. During the Philippine-American War and the brutal Moro Rebellion, American troops learned the hard way that their .38 caliber 1892 revolvers simply did not stop a determined enemy, especially since the Moro warriors often used drugs to inhibit pain. Moro fighters, charging through volleys with crisp swords drawn, often took multiple .38 rounds before going down. The Army called it insufficient stopping power. The press called it a scandal. And the War Department demanded a change.
Fire! Fire drill!
This was exasperated when the US Army temporarily reverted to the older Colt single action in .45. And reports found these were more effective at stopping the Moro warriors. However, revolvers were already becoming greatly outdated around this time, as many nations had begun adopting magazine-fed handguns, and Ordnance realized they needed to modernize. But first, Ordnance had to decide on a caliber to adopt. And so came the infamous Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904. Cadavers and cattle were shot with a variety of handguns in a brutal attempt to quantify man-stopping ability, including some very scientific tests that included shooting suspended human cadavers from various distances and measuring how far the corpses swung when shot. The conclusion? The next US military sidearm must be at least .45 caliber. This mandate sparked fierce debate. Some in Ordnance favored lighter, higher velocity rounds. One of these reasons was due to the fact that the German DWM Luger in 7.65 was one of the top contenders for adoption at this time, and DWM had specifically made an enlarged version of the 7.65 round for these US trials, 9x19 Parabellum, like the one we have here. There were particular individuals within Ordnance who had become obsessed with the ergonomics and shootability of the German Luger and fought for its adoption, but Ordnance demanded a .45 caliber handgun, and DWM decided to drop out of the trials, leaving only Savage, who was working on a striker-fired gun, and Colt, who had paired with John Moses Browning on a hammer-fired design. The final trials were held in 1910, where the Army fired 6,000 rounds through both handguns. It was reported that over the 2-day trial, the Colt experienced no failures, whereas the Savage had 37, resulting in a win for Colt. The Colt model of 1911 entered service just in time for the Great War. It proved rugged, powerful, and was popular among doughboys. And most of the complaints around this firearm were based around the ergonomics. After World War I, the Army called for refinements, and in 1924, the M1911A1 was born. This new iteration featured a shorter trigger, arched mainspring housing around the base of the grip for ergonomics, frame relief cuts, and so on. By World War II, several other companies had secured contracts to produce the 1911, and it was Remington Rand that manufactured the most handguns during this era. These handguns are recognizable for their sleek, minimalist design. A completely flat, parkerized gray finish, subtle markings, and basic brown polymer grips. That brings us to the present, where original 1911A1s are now sought after by collectors due to their historical significance. But what if you didn't want to spend thousands on an original Colt or Remington Rand? Well, that's where Tisas comes in. So here, I have two different Tisas 1911s. The first is the 1911A1 service model, which was the first A1 clone they brought to the market a few years ago. And the second is their most recent offering, called the ASF 1911A1, which is the ultimate cloner's dream, as it's an almost one-to-one replica of the Remington Rand. When Tisas first brought this product to the market, they focused on creating a product that balanced functionality with historical accuracy. However, this meant that there were several features that were incorrect for a 1911A1 clone in order to make this firearm more of a shooter's piece, such as the lower ejection port to allow for better ejection with various ammunition, an extended ejector, the beveling on the rear of the ejection port, a beveled magwell, but most notable is the Cerakote finish instead of the original parkerized finish, which you would have typically seen in World War II era firearms. Also, the firearm lacks the arched mainspring housing, which would have been correct for an original 1911, but not the 1911A1. Despite these changes, the firearms community highly praised this firearm online, especially considering what Tisas brought to the table for such a low cost. At under $400, these 1911A1 clones are priced lower than just about any 1911 you can get on the market today. But there were always those purists who wanted something better, something more accurate. And considering Tisas was already 90% of the way there, why not create a clone-correct 1911A1 for cheap? And you know what? Tisas delivered. Listening to the community, Tisas first released the 1911A1 US Army, which unfortunately we don't have one of those to showcase today, so we'll put some pictures up to show you instead. With this model, they removed the bevel from the side of the ejection port and included the arched mainspring housing. But most notably, they parkerized the firearm to give it that original look. This really brought the gun 99% of the way there, but Tisas is not done. Recently, they released the Armed Services Family Edition of their 1911A1 model. Gone is the lowered ejection port, restored is its wartime height. The finish? The proper parkerized phosphate, like they did with the US Army. The markings? Subtle and removed from the slide, properly replicating the Remington Rand 1911A1 models, including putting the military markings on the right side of the frame. The modern beveling on the magazine well was also removed in order to replicate the originals more closely. They also included two grip options, the classic 1911 wood-style grips, but also the period-correct brown polymer grips, exactly as the Remington Rand models would have been issued with. The only sin they committed was putting the serial on the left side with the import mark, instead of on the right side with the military markings. It's great seeing a company that actually listens to the community, makes changes based on feedback, and then delivers a new model with these updates in a timely manner. I can only imagine how frustrated Colt 1951 enthusiasts must feel right now, considering none of the reproduction companies can get the small details right on their clones after decades of changes. Well, I hope this video was informative and you enjoyed this silly little production. Sayonara!